Well, welcome to this episode of Chakmah, Choter. It's been a week's time, I think, since we have pursued um, our study of the Choter. The Choter is God's implement to awaken his people at this time. Is actually a big deal in terms of prophecy. It's amazing that there hasn't been a study on him, or that there aren't people looking for him. It's so strange that Christians are looking for the Antichrist, and yet there is no such character. There wasn't a Christ, much less an Antichrist, and there is certainly no mention of a Antichrist character in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. But within Dode's Mashal, his Proverbs, one entire proverb, the entirety of the 14th, is devoted to this individual, the Choter. It is remarkable what Dode has to say about him, and it's clear that he is exceedingly bright from the perspective of the brightest man who ever lived. And then we turn to Yeshaya, Isaiah, and he also writes a complete chapter, his 11th, about this individual who is going to arrive, has now arrived for the last generation of God's people. And in Isaiah, we find that he is unlike anyone who's ever lived. He is given the 7 spirits of Yahweh, including the Ruach of Yahweh. And he's also made Chakmah, which is smart, wise, thoughtful, ingenious, insightful. Someone who has a systematic approach to studying God's testimony so as to deduce not only appropriate conclusions and profoundly important insights, but also able to see the entire picture. He has this spirit of comprehension in terms of completion, the first person ever to see God's entire story, presented beginning to end and properly framed with all of the details presented along the way. This individual is also given the very unique spirit of understanding, something that is exceedingly rare in humans today. We have a whole cadre of overtly political Marxists and MAGAs, and of the religious, both Twistians and Muslims, who don't even know. And they believe instead. And believing is infinitely impoverished to knowing. And knowing is infinitely impoverished to understanding. And yet this individual is given the spirit of bien, of making the connections necessary to comprehend. He is also given the spirit of Gabor, of boldness, of competence, a feisty individual who is willing to combat all foes. He will attack the religious, he will attack the political, he will criticize everyone that is wrong about God, and will not give up on God's people, no matter how irascible and stiff-necked, hard-headed they continue to be. He also has the spirit of respect and reverence for Yahweh, as well as the spirit of knowledge. That's very unique. Never happened with anybody in all of human history. Moshe, for the preponderance of his time leading the children out of Israel, had a single spirit shared with 70 people. Dode had a spirit of Yahweh. Choter has 7, including the spirit of Yahweh, because there is so much to accomplish in such a short period of time to get it done, and the audience is so very, very difficult. So this is about the Choter. He is called a sucker from the fallen root stock of that was Yisrael. The sucker is the one who brings new life to the old roots and that fallen stump. Sucker is productive. He is a stem off the main branch, with Dode being the branch and the Choter being the stem. He is an offshoot of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so that God's people might know the truth again and be able to respond appropriately. He is also an implement of divine justice and judgment. So this is the Choter, and he is called by Yashayah and by Dode repeatedly as being Chakmah, particularly intelligent. So if we just to boil it all down into simple terms and have some fun with it, he's a smart sucker. And this is what he wants you to know, that this resolution that God is going to provide through Elia and Yada will come from Yahweh, because there will not be an acceptable response from any Israeli. Not now, anyway. This is because from the least significant of them, and inclusive of the greatest and most prominent of them, every one of them is deceptive. They are immoral. They're cut off and separated for having severed their relationship for dishonest gain. From the prophet to the priest, every one of them acts and engages falsely and deceitfully, vainly and uselessly, without reason or benefit. That's quite an indictment from God. This came from Jeremiah 6:13. Coal in this context is quite devastating. And to share with you the words that make up this indictment against Israel. It begins with key. This is because men Nathan him, from the least significant, men katan him, I should say, the least significant of them, and inclusive of the greatest and most prominent of them, Wa'ad Godel, him, every one of them, Kol Hu, every one of them is deceitful and immoral. They're cut off, they're separated for having severed the relationship for dishonest gain. Batza, from prophet to priest, men nabi wa'ad kohen, every one of them, Kol Hu, acts and engages the Shah falsely and deceptively, vainly, uselessly, without reason or benefit. Shakir. So Kol is, as I was saying, quite devastating in this context. As a present, there, I should say, as of the present, right now, according to God, there isn't a single Jew in Israel who is telling the truth, who isn't deceptive, and as a result, estranged from God. We know that every rabbi is lying, that God views them as scum, that they are parasites drawing the lifeblood out of God's people. We know that the Marxists on the progressive liberal side of Israel are inviting the devil to take part of their country. They would just as soon make a deal with the Muslims and give the Muslims a state carved out of the heart of Israel and pretend that they'll all get along until Israel is destroyed. The sad thing about progressives today, Marxists, is that they're unthinking. There's a complete disconnect with them between evidence and reason. And then you have the political right, and it's about as inappropriate. It's about as mistaken as is anyone else. I've had the opportunity to listen to a number of individuals, I should say, that have been integrated with the leaders of both Israel and the United States. And the story they tell of Benjamin Netanyahu is just horrible. I mean, my issue with Benjamin Netanyahu is twofold. One is I'm disgusted by his parliamentary bargain with the parasitic ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, tearing Israel apart. So counterproductive for Israel, so useless, and yet he offers them all manner of stipends. He offers them all manner of deferments from the military service, so they don't have to serve the country like all other Jews, and they're actually paid to be counterproductive. It's an exceedingly sad situation, and that's been my issue with Benjamin Netanyahu until recently. On the morning of 10/11, I knew what Benjamin Netanyahu was going to do. He was going to go to war in Gaza, and he was going to convince the right in Israel that was the only thing that could be done, and that Hamas could, in fact, be wiped out, and he was going to sacrifice additional Jewish lives in that process. And I knew that all that would accomplish is manufacturing more terrorists, and that is, in fact, impossible to remove Hamas from authority because they are Islamic in an Islamic enclave like Gaza, that the more Hamas that are killed, the more Muslim terrorists there will be. And so his war goals were impossible. And when you engage in a war and you sacrifice additional lives, and what you are doing is impossible, then, and you continue it, and what's the purpose? And in the process, he's turned the world against Israel. It's like committing suicide to go back into Gaza and expect a different result. So, but as I listen to these experts, they have Netanyahu in one manner of counterproductive scheme in conjunction with the United States after another that has backfired and destabilized the region, from the dealings with Qatar to America's invasion of Iraq to the destabilization of Libya, to the overthrow of the Assad regime and the imposition of the Islamic State. There is not much that is attributed to Benjamin Netanyahu that isn't exceedingly counterproductive. And he is pursuing a mission in Gaza that is costing Jewish lives and destructive of Jewish prestige, and is now suicidal because it's going to result in the imposition of a fake Palestinian state. So it's time for Netanyahu to go. All means all, that's all means, and that is what YAHOWAH is saying here. So as of present, there isn't a Jew in Israel who isn't deceptive, and as a result, estranged from God. They have severed the relationship primarily as a result of Judaism and overt liberal politics, which is from what in the religious context, from prophet to priest, affirms. The rabbis consider themselves prophets, although they have never issued a prophecy that came true. But nonetheless, they like to pretend. According to YAHOWAH, the rabbis are frauds. They're vain, they're useless, they have no benefit whatsoever. They are actually counterproductive. They are money grubbers. And that's the truth. Of course, you don't have to trust YAHOWAH. You can believe the rabbis instead, free and all. But what you cannot do, at least without squandering your soul and jeopardizing your nation, is to pretend that there is some kind of an affinity between Judaism and YAHOWAH, or even Judaism and the survival of Jews in Israel. Other than to denounce them, there is no mention of rabbis, of Judaism, of the Talmud, of the Star of David, of the Tefillin, of phylacteries, of kippahs, of yeshivas, the Haredi, Chabad, morning suits, weasel hats, Purim, Hanukkah, Rosh Hashanah, eating kosher, 9-candle menorahs, 4 species, Jewish law, Hashem, or G-D in the Torah, prophets, or Psalms. That's quite a list, Israel. And since you are my target audience, and since I have no chance of prevailing with you on behalf of Yahowah, who just happens to be God, or Dode, who just happens to be the returning king of Yisrael, until you give up and disassociate yourself from all religious influence. Let me go through that list again and to tell you the things that rabbis are famous for that have absolutely no sanction whatsoever within the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. Rabbis, no mention. Judaism, the Talmud, nope. A Star of David, nonsense. The Teflon, phylacteries, kippas. So much for the religious dress-up. Yeshivas, the Haredi, Chabad, morning suits, weasel hats, Purim, Hanukkah, Rosh Hashanah. Nope. Eating kosher. Not a word. God says these things are good for you to eat. These things are not good for you to eat. The list is very short. And then in Devarim, he says, eat whatever you want. Just do it intelligently. But this notion you can't eat dairy and meat together, utter nonsense. The notion that food must be blessed by the rabbi is nothing but a money-grubbing scheme. Those of you who are tormenting their lives by eating kosher, thinking that you're doing a favor for God, all you're doing is embarrassing yourself and antagonizing God. 9-candle menorahs. Nope. The 4 species for Sukkah. Nope. Nope. There's no mention of Jewish law, no mention of a Hashem or a G-D. Not one word. There is no mention, by the way, just so you're not gloating, should you be a Twistian, there is no mention of a Jesus. There is no prophecies or mention of a Christ, a Christian, of Christianity. How can you have a religion and you carry it around in your Bible and the name of your book is based on Babel, which is the thing that God says you've got to come out of. If you don't leave that, we're never getting back together. That is really the evil source, the whore of Babylon, from which all of the other whores were spawned, and you carry around a book called a Bible, in which there is absolutely no mention of your religion, of your man God, no Jesus, no Christ, no Christian, no Christianity. There's no mention of a church. How can you have a religion based upon a church when the book that you're carrying around doesn't even mention a church? There's no mention of Catholic, Pope, nun, cardinal, bishop, holy water, or a Holy Spirit. There is no reference to a cross, to a New Testament, to a virgin birth, to an angel named Gabriel, to Christmas, to the Lord's Supper, to Good Friday. No, there's no Easter, no Eucharist, no communion, no baptism. There's no Trinity. There's no man God. There's no resurrection. There's no gospel either. But all of that's another story. And don't get me started on Islam. The last time I rebuked it, oh, that was 4,200 pages of insanity to expose. So what Yahowah is saying is that his people in Israel are dunderheads. They're dishonest. They're hard-headed. They're estranged from him. And they're counterproductive. That's why this Choter was sent, to try to wake you up from this comatose stupor that you're in and get you to listen for the first time. And, well, it's just been about 3,450 years, give or take a decade or two. What's a long nap among friends? What Yahowah is saying next is that these rabbis have trivialized the extent to which Judaism has crippled Jews, fracturing their relationship with him. They claim that for a small fee, or actually a large donation, they can provide a rabbinical blessing to cure every ill. Of course, they never come true. Well, they come true at the same rate that they would come true if there was no blessing. Statistical analysis and all. That's like Christian prayers too. They have the exact same effect as average normative behavior. Now, although placebo effects does have some value in most things, you can believe yourself to be better or not. Now, according to God, so they have played the role of healer to mend, that which pertains to the crippling wound and fracturing injury, this destructive fissure that is sickening my family and my people. With disdain, trivializing it as if an insignificant slight or a trifling occurrence, by saying, "Oh, shalom, shalom, peace and reconciliation," when there is no shalom, there's no peace, there's no reconciliation, there's no companionship, friendship, salvation, or blessing. There's no contentment or well-being. Jeremiah 6:14. The religious leaders in Israel have played the role of healer to mend. And what they have done is they have crippled the people. They have fractured the relationship. They have made the ill terminally sick. They have been a plague on God's people. And then they have trivialized all of this as it was just a trifling occurrence by saying, "Oh, shalom, shalom, peace and reconciliation." He says, there is no peace. There is no reconciliation. Now, shalom is the byword of Judaism and Jews. They yearn for peace, and there has been none, and there's going to be less. Reconciliation comes by way of the mikre that Dowd fulfilled, and they don't acknowledge any of his achievements. So while there are rabbis and they have influence over Jews, Yahowah and Yehudim live apart. And that needs to change. Religion is so irrational. Believers should be ashamed, but they aren't. And I guess it's because they're just not that thoughtful, that moral, that reasonable. And of course, this bothers God immensely. He said, speaking of Jews of Israel, they are shamed and humiliated when actually committing the detestable and repulsive religious abomination of repugnant worship. So although they were shameful and humiliating themselves, they just weren't ashamed. Moreover, they did not know that they were disgraceful and dishonorable, even embarrassing. Therefore, they will fall, prostrating themselves and bowing down, descending with those who fall, prostrate themselves and bow down while descending. When the time comes that I take inventory of them and I hold them accountable, and they will stumble and fall, says Yahowah. Jeremiah 6:15. There can be no doubt that God is talking about the negative influence of those in the nation of Israel, among God's people. He said this was his family, his people, who are acting as religious leaders, ministers, prophets, religious titles. This is not good, Israel. This means that those who are claiming that they shape the people's relationship with God are the ones that are fracturing it. And it goes further. It's to say that the most shameful aren't aware that they're an abomination. This reminds me of Donald Trump claiming to be the great savior of the world and of America, and doesn't know that he is, in fact, the opposite of that. He should be ashamed, but he doesn't have the humility to be ashamed. It says they are shameful. They're detestable because of their repulsive religious abominations and their repugnant worship. Toabah. Toabah is the term that Yahweh uses throughout the Torah and prophets to describe his disgust for religious abominations, detestable, repulsive, and repugnant worship. So although they were shameful and humiliating themselves, they didn't have the capability, the conscience to be ashamed. They lacked the good judgment to know what they were doing was disgusting. They act like they're holier than thou, and they are the most disgusting and repulsive among the people. They just do not know how disgraceful, dishonorable, and embarrassing they are. Therefore, I will make them fall. Therefore, they will fall. They will prostrate themselves. They will bow down with those who fall, prostrate themselves, and bow down. In other words, all of those who are religious and who like to bow down are going to be forced to bow down with all of the others who are religious in judgment. And they will be condemned. They will be taken down as God takes stock of them and holds them accountable. They will fall. The only question is, will you fall with them? Will they take you down with them? Now, all of those dressed in their weasel hats and morning suits with their phylacteries and their teflons, their kippas, are going to fall. They're too religious to awaken. And they're going to fall with them. And so the people I'm talking to are those that represent the 60% in the middle of Israel that are not overtly political from a progressive point of view, and therefore hostile to the very idea of God, and not among the ultra-Orthodox who are disgusting, toba, repulsive from God's perspective. So every aspect of religion is toba according to God. It's repugnant, it's repulsive, it's reprehensible. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But since God is talking about Jews, well, it is the fact that Jewish rabbis created all three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And they're all repulsive, they're all toba. But in this case, God's biggest issue is with Judaism. It's done the most harm to God's people. They're an abomination to the Almighty. Believers foolishly revel in what God considers shameful, and they aren't smart enough to know what they're doing is disgusting. The faithful are embarrassing themselves. They're being played by fools to be fools. Religions all lead to the same place, bowing down in judgment before God and being condemned by Him. The best possible outcome for the faithful is to forfeit their soul. However, those guilty of promoting their beliefs will call Sheol home, making hell a very religious address. Yahweh is on record saying that He will take inventory of those who bow down, and their recompense will be to bow down in judgment before being cast down. Fair is fair, after all. Now, this brings us to the verse a covenant member asked me to translate for her on our Facebook home not very long ago. And Facebook's kind of been an interesting phenomenon for us. We've been on Facebook now for 5 months. And during 5 months, we have grown from 0 friends and followers to 5,000, which is the summit of Facebook. You can't go beyond 5,000. But to go from 5,000, from 0 to 5,000 in 5 months, that's worthy of celebration. I thank every one of you. And it's only possible because so many of members of the covenant family participated, shared, liked, commented, posted. The feed into the Craig Winn Facebook account is really exceptional in the quality of the participants and what they are sharing. And now we have the Yada Yahowah group page, which is also growing. So it was a covenant member, and that's one of the beautiful things about Facebook is it's a lovely environment for us to exchange ideas and to communicate with one another, to reinforce one another. It has a lovely chat room that is frequented by many covenant members as we do these live streams. And so someone asked me if I wouldn't mind translating this next passage for her, which is to stand upon the path that Yahweh has provided to bring us home, back to him, into the covenant family. They said, this is one of my absolute favorite passages. I would love for you to render it for me. So doing so is not going to be a happy note for the religious. This is what Yahweh says. It's not what Hashem says. It's not what G-D says. It's not what Adonai, the Lord, says. It isn't what Jebus says. It isn't what Mr. Christ says. It most certainly isn't what Allah says. It is what Yahweh says, and you have no authority to remove Yahweh's name from his testimony. And because it was removed, completely wasn't removed, was never included. At any point in the Christian New Testament, it was never included in the Quran. It was never included in the Talmud. Those books do not speak for, were not inspired by Yahweh. But this prophet, Yirmiyah, was. This is what Yahweh says. Choose to be present, standing, Ahmad, upon the paths, Derek, and be observant, choosing to look. Then, of your own free will, inquire about the eternal ways to walk, where you should consider the agreeable, productive, and beneficial way. So choose to walk in it and discover a restful state of relief from anxiety and trouble for your soul. However, they said, we will never walk that way. Just as they told God, go away and shut up and never speak to them again. The Bereth and Moedim are inseparable, with the annual restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony of the appointed meetings, providing the way home to the Bereth covenant family. Affirming this, the first three Mikre fulfilled in 33 CE by Dode deliver the benefits of the covenant relationship: life, perfection, adoption, enrichment, and empowerment. And of course, it is by walking away from religion that these benefits become possible. Now, the depiction of Safa, observant watchman, laying everything out, is a systematic and orderly way, and that of the Nakri observant foreigner in 2 Chronicles 6 and Jeremiah 6, we find they bear a striking resemblance, which is one of the reasons I chose to reinforce one prophetic proclamation with the other. Yahweh's recommended response to this individual is consistent in both prophecies. So let's consider what God had to say. So there will come a time when I will raise up and establish someone who is especially observant to keep watch over you, laying everything out in a systematic and orderly way. Safa al-Atem. But be alert and pay attention. choosing to listen closely, accept what you hear, and then respond appropriately to the call voice of the shofar, the trumpeter, which is blown to announce Shabuah and Towrah. However, they said, we will never listen and respond. Jeremiah 6:17. While the identity of and the requested response to this observant individual are consistent, there is an additional attribute afforded in Jeremiah 6, that is not mentioned in 2 Chronicles, Words of the Day 6. And that is the call voice resonating through the shofar. Now, the shofar is blown to announce Shabuah, which is the upcoming harvest that Yahweh's Choter is responsible. And then the harvest at the other end of the time of Jacob's trouble, 7 years later, is Towrah, which is inseparable from the concept of the shofar. The shofar and Towrah are integrated as one in the same. And it is the Bashar, herald of Yahweh and of Dod, that is fulfilling the day of the herald, Towrah. So the obvious implication is that Yada is the trumpeter of Shabuah and Towrah. He is the voice that is echoing through and reverberating through that horn. And this is why Yahweh instructs us to herald the Moedim, the two remaining harvests. Shabuah, May 22nd, 2026, and Towrah, 23 September 2033. Doing so through the shofar. Now, the realization that the Nakri and Safa will speak on behalf of Goyim and Yehudim is another uncommon thread that is woven in common with these two accounts. And there we find God encouraging those who are interested in receiving the benefits of the relationship to listen to Yada, because he is the Ida, the restoring witness to the eternal testimony of our God. As a result, it is important that you choose to listen. Goyim, non-Israelites, in addition to other nations, then of your own free will, become familiar with and recognize, coming to know and acknowledge Yada. Discover, respect, and decide to be concerned about, comprehending Yada. Call imperative, your choice, but do so genuinely. Acknowledge Yada as the Ida, the restoring witness to the community, as the one offered to convey the eternal testimony to the multitudes regarding the benefits of the relationship with them. Eth Asher Ba Hem. Jeremiah 6:18. So here we had a covenant member. She's saying, I'd really like you to translate a verse, and the verse was quite nice. It spoke of Yahweh saying, choose to be present and standing. So I want you as a community to be present at this time and accountable, standing upright, taking a stand upon the paths. And God's asking us as a community to be observant, choosing to pay very close attention to what's happening all around us. Then he says, of your own free will, inquire about the eternal way to walk, the way to walk to eternity, where you should consider the agreeable, productive, and beneficial way. Oh, choose to walk in it. Discover this restful state for your soul. Now, that is Yirmiyah 6:16. It's lovely. But by saying, all right, I'll translate this for you, but I have this inability. I have a disability. Yes, I do. Oh, Esther is crying down here. I probably can't pick her up on the microphone, but he said, "Yeah, Dad, you really do. You have it's my yellow lab, Asher. You have a disability. You know what my disability is? I can't translate a single verse out of context. I couldn't do it for the life of me. There's another disability. I can't translate something even in context without commenting on it. So those are disabilities that I've had right from the beginning. And so by this person asking me to do, well, would you mind translating that verse? Well, we opened up this marvelous statement and this prophecy in Yirmiyah in the 6th chapter. And so it led us to this pronouncement. There will come a time when I will raise up, this is Yahweh speaking, and I will establish, someone who is especially observant to keep watch over you, laying everything out in the open in a systematic and orderly way. Look at these 35 books you see behind me. They take you from beginning to end. They lay out everything there is to know about Yahweh in a very systematic manner. And in this way, God has enabled me to watch over you, literally laying everything out in the open. Every word face up on the table in the most orderly fashion possible. So we then read that you are, as a result of this, to be alert, pay attention, choosing to listen, and accept what you hear, and then respond appropriately to this, the call voice of the shofar. It would be the voice of Shabuah, the voice of Towrah, the voice of the shofar that calls God's people home, the voice of the instrument being used to warn them that should they continue as they have for the past 3,000 years, it's going to work out very poorly for them. And now that shofar needs to be used to arouse God's people, to wake them up from the stupor that they have been in, to inspire them to open their minds, learn the truth, and come to know God. Be alert, pay attention, hear what is said, and then respond appropriately to the voice of the shofar, heralding Shabuah and Towrah, the last two harvests. Unfortunately, they said, we will never listen and respond. So God adds, as a result, it is important that you choose to listen, Goyim. You know, that's one of the things that was so interesting as we began this. Well, there were Jews, several, that listened and responded to this message early on. There was initially more Gentiles than Yehudim. Now I'd say in the covenant family, it's probably 60 to 70% Yehudim and 30 to 40% Goyim. And today, those who join God's family are overwhelmingly Israelites. But it's important that since so few Jews listened initially, that God says, so you listen, Goyim. You listen. And then of your own free will, become familiar with and recognize, coming to know and acknowledge Yada. You know, God's people, chosen people, are Israelites and Yehudim. That doesn't mean that they're the only people he created on earth. God has no issue with Goyim, so long as the Goyim stop acting like Goyim and embrace what Yisrael was supposed to represent. And if we embrace what Yisrael was supposed to represent, then we're actually better at that point than is Yisrael, because they unfortunately have accepted what the Goyim have been. And so this is sort of role reversal. God's saying that My people, Yisrael, are acting like Goyim. So I want you to speak to the Goyim such that they can be what Yisrael was supposed to be. Then, of your own free will, become familiar with, recognize, and coming to know and acknowledge Yada as the Ida, restoring witness to the community. And that is our mission. That is our job. That is why we're here. And all of this regarding the benefits of the relationship. In his Torah, Yahweh clearly states that there is just one Torah for Yehudim and Goyim. That means that the Torah is also for Yehudim and Goyim. And therefore, it cannot be the Jewish Torah, can it? When there is one Torah for Yehudim and Goyim. It's Yahweh's Torah. And it's as applicable to a open-minded, observant, responsive Goy as it is Yahud. So Jews were the chosen people, but not the only people. And the realization that Yehudim have not chosen Yahweh in return has in this case brought Goyim to the forefront of the Yirmiyah 6 and also to the 2 Chronicles 6 prophecies regarding the reawakening and restoration of Yisrael, along with the inclusion of Goyim. Following a period of absolute silence for 2,500 years, God would equip Yada as a Goy to be his Ida on behalf of Asher to Israelites and to Gentiles. Well, I am quite honestly known as a man of many words. My wife, Leah, is a woman of many sheep, and therefore, quite literally, in what has been an arranged marriage, we have Goy and Yehud, Ida and Ra'ah. And in collaboration with Yahweh and Dod, we will deliver a peri, a productive harvest of the Mashak Haba, the thoughtful and rational. But pay no attention to all of these uncanny similarities, because it's apparent that just because I was asked to translate this prophecy the same day I completed the preceding presentation of Solomon's Sermon on the Mount, and that Yirmiyah's narrative echoes the exact same themes while adding others that are equally specific, instructive, and identifying, that's purely coincidental, of course. Nevertheless, since this is God speaking to the earth, yeah, you may want to listen anyway. Oh, listen, earth, and see that, behold, I am bringing a Ra'ah, a shepherd, to enable, to lead, and to care for these people. Ra'ah, a woman to tend to the needs of the flock, feminine singular. For these people, producing a fruitful harvest for Masak Haba, a thoughtful and rational person among them. For those who take the plan into account and then consider the value of what has been imputed from Ma, to question the implication of Chasab, intelligently assessing the plan, to comprehend and to value the creativity that went into composing it. But by contrast, upon my debar word, they have not paid attention. They do not listen nor respond. And my Torah teaching, they have not, but rejected it. They limit their association with it, and they spurn it. Jeremiah 6:19. I am intrigued and comforted by Perry Masha Abba, a harvest of the thoughtful and rational, specifically excluding Dabar Lo Kashab, those who do not listen to the word of God. This affirms Yahweh's affinity for intellect and his preference for quality over quantity. From the outset, I have relied upon Yahweh's prior disclosures to calibrate the nature of the ensuing harvest. The party in Eden began with just one person, Adam, and only became two with the addition of Chakmah, not for Yahweh, but for the benefit of man. Then Yahweh reached out to a single individual, Noach, when he wanted to save the rest of humankind in the ark. The members of Noach's family all boarded. Next, Yahweh introduced himself to Abram on his way out of Babel, and they became a family of three, forming the third iteration of the covenant relationship. Having conveyed the impending specter of a fractured family, with Hagar and Ishmael being rejected, the eternal conflict would play out again with Jacob being the chosen while Esau was banished. Thereafter, a family of three would grow with the addition of 2 wives, a daughter, and 12 sons. And while this wasn't a reminder of God's preference for quality over quantity, since the boys behaved badly, there are glimpses of it in the next episode. A lone individual, Moshe, was asked to liberate the children of Israel when he balked, knowing firsthand that the Hebrews were mostly unsalvageable. Yahweh offered to include another, Aaron, who contributed nothing and mucked everything up. Then when Moshe gave up and told Yahweh that he couldn't do this alone, God shared the Ruach that he had offered Moshe with 70 Israelites, only to show that more would be counterproductive and a nuisance. Then, even when approaching the promised land, only 2, Yosha and Koleb, of the entire generation rescued from Mitzrayim, were allowed to enter, demonstrating Yahweh's predilection again for quality over quantity. And even in this, Ra'ah, this lady shepherdess, she would play her part as the Chakmoth. She is the wise woman of the 14th Mashal and gets the nod and it is opened. As an intellectual introvert, Leah's happy place is with reasoned thoughts rather than a mob of people. Not only would her contribution to the Peri, this fruitful harvest, be comprised of those who value everything Yahweh has imputed, she would be a gatekeeper, precluding the approach of those who did not belong because they do not have kashab, a proper response to Yahweh's Torah teaching. In fact, everything in Leah's world revolves around the Torah, like Yahweh, ma'as, reject it or spurn it, and she will ma'as, limit her association with you. No pleasantries or niceties afforded, nor any of the customary social protocols. Just goodbye and good riddance. Get off my porch with Leah. The Torah is the dividing line between living in Yahweh's presence or being banished from it. We choose where we belong by being mashakaba, thoughtful and rational regarding God's guidance. And to this purpose, the volumes of Yada Yahowah are comprehensive. They are cerebral, neither summarized nor dumbed down for the faint of intellect. You see, Yahweh has no interest in those who would rather believe man's rubbish instead of following the path he has provided home. Even when the stench of religion is fumigated by burning incense, the smoke still obscures the perspective on how things like labona, frankincense, sweetens the aroma of the sacrifice, which purifies the adulterous woman of Israel prior to the king's return. The religious know nothing of Yahweh's Shabat, his promise to Kane, to acquire the branch needed to redeem them, men Eretz Merkach, from a faraway land outside of Israel. Unaware of Solomon's dedication speech at the commencement ceremony for the completion of the house of Yahweh Shem, the uninitiated remain believers rather than knowers. He has marked the path with his symbols, serving as signs to tell us that we're in the right place for the right reason and the correct season. This will be our concluding statement here in this program. And it reads, "For what is there for me of any frankincense, for incense as an accoutrement to the sacrifice, or as a means to purify the adulterous woman? Coming from Shabat, the promise of Kane, the acquired and redeeming branch, who is productive and beneficial, pleasing and generous from this faraway land. Your sacrificial and burnt offerings are not acceptable and do not garner favor, because your sacrifices that you have prepared are a worthless bargain, because they are unrelated to me." Remember when I told you that Purim, Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah had no bearing, no basis in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms? This is what God's talking about. They're worthless because they are unrelated to Yahweh. And even the moed that God specified, Jews have mucked them all up. They've made Passover a 7-day celebration when Passover is just the first day of matzah, and they no longer celebrate matzah or Bikurim, even though matzah is the most essential day as part of this divine witness. They are clueless really as to what is Shabuah, that it is, well, they know that it's a wheat harvest, but don't know anything about it beyond that, or that it will be fulfilled within this next year. They think it is simply a celebration of the Torah being revealed, even though there's no assurance that that is the case. It is just assumed from the context. But it is most certainly a harvest, and that harvest is going to take place 22nd May, 2026, of which the only Jews who know this are those who have benefited as part of the covenant family. So God is saying, you have your festivals, you have your feast, you have your ways of doing things that are religious, but they have no association for me. None of this means anything to me. You are not redeemed. There's nothing pleasing or beneficial about you because, well, quite frankly, you did not listen to the promise that I made of being able to reacquire you and redeem you through this branch, who is productive and beneficial, even pleasing, from a land far, far away. So this is God's way of telling his people, you continue to be religious and we continue to be estranged. I have afforded this branch, this Choter, onto your behalf. His name is Yada. He is calling out to you. He is here for your benefit. He has come from a very far away land. And he is doing this because you continue to be estranged from me because of your religion. My recommendation is that you listen. And I know that if you made it this far into this YAHOWAH blog, then you are one of those who have, and I thank you for that. I look forward to continuing this series with you tomorrow as we share Yahweh's testimony with his people in anticipation of his return with our beloved King. This has been an episode of the YAHOWAH